I'm Vivienne Chow. So it's great to have you here this afternoon on the Good Friday. Today's Good Friday. Yep. So today's topic: where are the art critics, cultural journalism in today's media landscape? So the first part of the discussion, I'll ask each panelist one or maybe a few questions, and then we'll go into a group discussion. So the first one I would like to ask is Ban Ye. So I'm gonna 講中文。咁咧
So I will switch to Chinese. We have been discussing that in 2012, all of a sudden, Hong Kong became an art hub. Everybody loves art. Everyone is queuing up for art. But you seem to have some different ideas. Is Hong Kong really an art hub? That's the first question. And then, for those art critics or people reporting cultural news in Hong Kong and around the world, it seems like they are quite distanced from this scenario. Is it relevant to them? Can you hear me? Yes? Well, I would like to say that I have only started really writing about art in the past 2 to 3 years. I spent 11 years in total with Apple Daily, part of my time going into culture, and culture, of course, includes art. But the level or the extent of which really focuses on art is really not that much because not too many people would read about it. Apple Daily is a mainstream newspaper. If you work there, you know clearly you need to write something that most people would want to read. So, relatively speaking, in the realm of culture, if I write about movies or social campaigns, something about pop culture, yes, more people will read them. In recent years, I write about art and I would interview international curators and artists. I would ask them, for example, Art Relay, is Hong Kong an art hub? They will be nice and say, yes, of course it is. For these reasons, blah, blah, blah. And then you need to ask, how is it an art hub? If you look at the commercial side, yes, of course, we cannot deny those figures, showing you that in terms of art transactions, Hong Kong is important. But if you come from the cultural angle or local artists, then I have a question mark. When you look at different reports, beginning from 2012, Art Hong Kong turned into Art Basel in Hong Kong. So before 2012, well, we have been saying that Hong Kong is an art desert. Suddenly in 2012, we became an art hub. Is it because the level or the quality of artwork in Hong Kong suddenly improved a lot and many new artists emerged? Well, it just seems a bit unrealistic. So, in fact, is there more coverage about art? And what about the perspective of such coverage? What do you think? Do you feel that the focus is on something that would attract sales or attract people's attention? Do you think that is the angle? Well, it depends on the expectation of the media. If I am still with Apple Daily, well, I do see colleagues from Apple Daily here today, so you can also ask them for some comments. As long as you work for Apple Daily, your boss will expect you to write something that is attractive, that people want to read. If it's very meaningful, okay, it's going to attract readership. Or you're a very popular writer or journalist, then okay. It's more acceptable to your boss, but you can't write the same topic every week. You can't keep writing something that is influential but has no readership. So there is a gap concerning our expectations. Today, I am working at a different place. Their expectation is different. I can write something that has limited readership, but everyone working for my company are experienced people. We have more freedom to choose what we want to write about. We can have more freedom to interview different artists. So it depends on who you expect to read what you write. So we are talking about newspapers, and there will be different approaches. So, Tinny, I have a question for you. Well, you work for a very popular newspaper. Many people read Apple Daily. What is the actual operation? Maybe you want to sell a story. You have to sell it to your boss first. What problems do you encounter? Do you have to find a certain angle? Because we're talking about a mass audience. So you have to write something that is understandable to your mother, right? Any mother understands, right? It doesn't have to be my mother. But when you choose a topic, to be honest, in commercial art space or private art spaces, there are many exhibitions going on. Many art events are taking place. So when we select, we will be more inclined towards something closer to our daily life, something more relevant. We have this term among ourselves. We will talk about how above ground that matter is. When we do art news or art interviews, we also shoot a video. So the whole matter is easier to understand, or it's easier to choose a topic. Today we can report on some art topics that may be for smaller groups of people. When we report art-related news, we do expect a smaller hit rate. That is some burden I have already left behind me. What about your boss and the owner of your newspaper? I suppose at the end they all look at figures, don't they? That's why when I choose the topic, I have to be selective. This is not the only priority, which is the hit rate, when I choose a piece of news. What about magazine? A magazine should be very different, right? Samwai? You have this monthly magazine. There's no video news, nothing is online. You don't have the online version yet. So to you, do you enjoy more freedom? Can you do whatever you want? How do you package a story that is totally up to you? Well, yes. Concerning our monthly magazine, compared to newspapers, well, newspapers will focus on something more immediate. We are monthly issues, so we don't really need to focus too much on timing. So there is some buffer already. Today we are talking about art critics, but I think we need time to critique art. It is not something so straightforward. It is about the way of seeing. You need to look at the artwork for quite some time, and then you need to identify an approach to interpret the artwork. So art critique itself is something rather slow. When we do news, we have to act very quickly. So I think between slow and swift, there is this tension.
John. I think Hong Kong is we have a majority of people. They read in Chinese and they write in Chinese, and of course, in Chinese media, Chinese language media is the most dominant. But for you, as a writing for English language publications here in Hong Kong, especially writing art reviews and or art writing, what are the greatest obstacles that you face? Is it finding an appropriate platform or reaching an audience? And because when you write in English, then we must accept the reality is that we can only reach a small number of people. Unlike our colleagues working in the Chinese media. So what do you think?
Okay, the greatest challenge I have is when I'm writing for a newspaper, and I write the art reviews for the South China Morning Post. What I try to do when I write is to educate, and I don't mean that in a condescending way, but I want to tell the audience something they don't know about the art or the artist. And so if you look at the reviews I've written, it's not trying to dumb down the reader and to baby them into the world of art. If they have seen the exhibition, they should learn something, and if they haven't seen the exhibition, they should be intrigued to see the art or an exhibition that I'm talking about. But the biggest challenge with a newspaper is I write. The challenge for all of us that write for newspapers, whether it's Chinese or English, is I write something, and newspapers love a broad brush. They don't like nuance. And that's my biggest challenge, is trying to get the nuance, the subtle little things that are very important, and to explain. And, you know, the word very good doesn't tell me anything. But if I can explain something in detail and give the something more exact. And so the thing you read in the newspaper can often be not what I've written. And what I tend to do, the art critics in Hong Kong, we have a website, and everything I write about art is usually put on that website because it's a record of what I wrote and that nuance. I actually also write, you know, a lot for the Chinese press, and I've just been asked to write a very big overview of the Hong Kong art scene by Artco Monthly, which is a very large and respected art magazine in Taiwan. And I will write that in English, and it will be translated into Chinese. I did something like that, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. So this is like a little bit of an update. And many years ago, I did start writing things about art for Mingpo Weekly, and I've restarted that. And I tend to, when I'm writing for magazines, I tend to incorporate art into wider social issues, political or social, and my particular interest is in urban planning.
Mm-hmm. So now I would like to ask David question. I think just to follow on what John and I just discussed, it's I think finding the right balance between something that is very so-called very accessible to the public, and keeping the important essence that's and the elements that concern or that can explain people about some really important elements of and a piece of artwork. So how do you find the balance?
Well, I'm in a slightly different position to John in that I rarely write for newspapers, very, very occasionally, and then absolutely encounter the same problems that he does. They don't like nuance. And art is all about nuance. And writing too, and it's bringing those two things together. So, I mean, I work as a writer mainly as an essayist about artists or themes or places that I'm interested in. So groups of artists or ideas like art and happiness or something like that, or art from Tibet, or like someone like Saigo Cheng, an essay on his work, or Shu-bun. So there's all these different categories of writing. But there's two demands, really. One is my own, of one to make it a good bit of writing. And when I start off, I'm not really sure of what I'm going to be writing about it. And in a sense, my opinion about the artist in many ways, obviously I have an engagement with their work, but very often I end up feeling much more strong and close to their work than I did before. So it's for me, it's digging deeper into the work, but also finding ways of expressing its complexity in words. Because it's very often visual or experiential in its impact. And of course, if the artist wanted it in words, they would become writers. So we have to create a parallel way of expressing this, which is also intelligible. I don't want to impress anyone with the number of words I know, but sometimes it's good to use particular words because they give it some lift, and English is a good language in that respect. I'm sure Chinese as well, and there are many historical things you can invoke which maybe echo what the artist is doing in their work, particularly in the Chinese situation, where an artist may be referring back to classical culture in some way. But one doesn't labor it. It's on a case-by-case basis, sometimes a word-by-word basis. But the thing is not to use jargon. I'm not very keen. I read critical theory, but for me, critical theory has no hierarchy over the artist. Most artists haven't read it. They maybe know a lot of it instinctively, but to academicize one's writing in another language, to me, seems to be absolutely futile. So I try and use language which is straightforward.
I think that's what I learned too when I started as a journalist. It's simplicity is the best. You want to communicate with your audience. But then the current status of the media in Hong Kong, it's we're at a very critical stage at the moment, and I think. But the art critics or even cultural journalism or reporting aside, it's just very difficult to get people to come into this industry or to attract young talents or new talents to be in this business. So earlier we were talking about the salary situation and the word rate situation. So basically, the current, the latest rates here. So if you write for an English language media internationally, so you can get a word rate anywhere between 4 Hong Kong dollars and 10 Hong Kong dollars per word. And if you write for an English language media in Hong Kong, so the word rate, it can be $2 Hong Kong and $4. It depends on the publication and how good you are, of course. But then when it comes to Chinese language publications, it's pretty terrible. So it can go anywhere from 0 and 30 cents Hong Kong. And then the standard is $1 per word. And if you get $2 Hong Kong dollars a word, then you are pretty good. And the entry level for the salary of being a reporter. So apparently, Bun and I were talking about. So Bun started when he was back in 1994, and he was paid 12 12,000 Hong Kong dollars. 95. I started in 2000. I also got the same salary. And apparently 2016 today is still 12,000. So the salary has not gone up a cent over the years, but if you look at the property prices, we all know. So it's very discouraging and very frustrating, especially for people who are interested in getting into this field. So I want to ask all the panelists here, why there's such a case? Do people really don't value good writing, or is it because media is really such a difficult business, or why is writing so undervalued? 大家隨便發表點睇？John.
Okay. The rate I get for a review of $350 at the South China Morning Post is, and I provide usually a photograph, is $1,300. If I write a feature article, I get $250. If I write the articles for Mingpo Weekly, I get $400. It's 800 words in English. It's translated by a translator who gets $600. I've written...
Sorry. So the translator gets paid more?
Yes. I've written, and I use a gallery for example. I've written 3 catalogue essays for Blind Spot Gallery, one of the best galleries in Hong Kong. It's a photography gallery. I've never been paid. The last one I wrote for was for South Ho, and I think I wrote 3,500 words, maybe 4,000 words, mainly on the umbrella movement, and nothing. I got a few free copies of the catalogue. Now, I'm telling you this not because I want you to feel sorry for me, because I'm in a very privileged position. I have some other income, and I'll be very honest with you. I write because I love it, and that's a very honoured position, I may say. You know, some of the other panel members work for a living, and the rates that Vivienne is quoting is appalling. But, you know, some of us, in the end, writing is a passion. And the most hardest job I've ever done is to try and construct a well-constructed sentence. You know, I first trained as a social worker. I've worked with very, very hard men in prison. My first job was working with guys in prison. And, you know, as most of you know, I was a gallery owner. But actually the most difficult job is sitting alone and trying to struggle with a few words. It really is very difficult. So to answer your question about why aren't people coming into writing, well, some people don't have the talent. Some people don't have the ability. As you know, we've all been to school. You know, I don't have the talent in mathematics. I would never consider myself to be a computer programmer or someone who sits down and does mathematical things. But luckily I've been able to, you know, put a few words together.
咁但係即係如果係即係 John 咁樣嘅情況，即係 OK 佢另外有啲收入啊咁樣，好啦。但係如果你真係想即係全職
，not much，
有啲啊我話，咁我話即係如果你想全職去做，去即係dedicate 你自己100% 係擺落去即係 writing， 尤其你仲要寫即係藝術文化嘅話，其實係咪真係好似冇可能咧？即係好似佢只可以係你一個 hobby。你喺你第二啲時間咁你做到就做啦，咁即係你去 develop 你呢個 passion 啦咁樣。咁其實係點樣咧 ？Tinny 有冇咩睇法咧？崩爺咁樣，大家三位。
我諗記者就另一個範疇，即係因為佢係 paid monthly 啦，咁呢個就即係但係我都真係未聽過香港有 art critics 咧係可以。即係全職係做 art critics， 而佢係可以 support 到佢嘅 living 咯。咁我唔知 John, did you find anyone that?
No, I think people freelance art writers or cultural writers. I mean, you can actually make a lot of money as a freelance writer in English if you do travel writing or pseudo writing about culture.
What is pseudo writing?
Well, the sort of writing that I'm pressured to do is like I did a recent interview with Pearl Lamb for the Peak magazine. And actually, I don't really like doing that because it's very easy. The first time in my life, because I was a little bit nervous, I bought myself a tape recorder and taped the interview. I've never done that ever in my life. I've always written brief notes and of course, looked at done background research and checked. But with Pearl, I thought, right, I better do this properly. And of course, actually, for that sort of profile interview, the demand is on lots of quotations. And I actually don't like doing that because I think that's easy journalism. But in fact, I got paid more for that than anything I would get paid for normally. And that was for a glossy magazine. But actually, I don't like that. But freelance journalists can actually make good money if they have no bounds to what they want to do. Personally, I want to write critically and seriously.
Because you are in the position that you can choose what you want. But Samwai, what do you have something 有咩想法?
Do you have anything to say? Now, regarding magazines, just now I forgot to make a point. There is not much room to write art critics. Very often I work on artist profile. So, as what John said, we need to get their quotes or sound bites, and there is only very little chance to write about or write art critics. So, how can you perceive your relationship with the artist if you are to write critics? You should not allow the artist to continuously talk about his artwork, right? I would like to say that in the past, I worked for Economic Journal, and many years ago, I guess 10 odd years ago, the culture page or section of Economic Journal is very diversified. We can write 2,000 words, art critics, and for one drama, for example, on one side, the writings are by two people. On one side, there are all compliments. On the other side, there are all criticisms. But then there are enough justifications to support those comments. At that time, these articles were nice to read because they are very diversified. Whenever there is a cultural event on the same day, you can find related persons to comment on it. So these include policies or drama performances or big cultural events. So people can view the same thing from a lot of different angles. But gradually, this room is getting smaller and smaller in Hong Kong. It seems that art and culture is only something supplementary. It's only a very small sector. So it's just something you may be interested to do on weekends, right? Yes. Every day in shopping malls, there are art events. But they have become introductions of art only, not critics or commentary. I would like to make a few points. Now, in the past, the culture section of Economic Journal was very strong. We all know about that. But at that time, literati was the head of the Economic Journal. But then that era was over. I am just giving facts here. So that era was over. Now, the operation of each newspaper is not like that. Even if you talk about monthly magazines, even if there is culture and art section, there are still a lot of commercial considerations and operations. In the past, I have been a reader of Economic Journal for many times, and back then, that journal is for one type of readers. So it is considered newspapers for the elites. They are not for the mass. But then it's far from that. it is for a small group of well-educated people with acquired taste. But then that is over already, and things are irreversible. Vivienne just said that it's like arts and culture is like something good to do on weekends. So people don't know what to do. They just think that it is good to have some art in the media. Now let me talk about history of Hong Kong media. In 1995, I worked for a youth magazine. At that time, weekly magazine is such that you don't know what will be the content for the next issue, or how much content will there be. So you will say, okay, one page can be set aside for arts and culture, and the colleague responsible, for example, there is a fashion journalist, and she wrote 5 pages, 10 pages on fashion, and she likes arts and culture, so she also works on that culture section as well. But whenever content has to be reduced, definitely the culture page will be cut. So that's it in history. And this also happens very frequently now. Yes. If all of a sudden there is an advertisement that has to be placed, then stories related to culture, with the exception of the WKCD, will be dumped right away. My articles, my materials were dumped many times.
Well, I think one of the problems with newspapers, and not only in Hong Kong, but in Great Britain certainly, which I know the press scene very well, is that most of them are owned by private individuals. And their view also is that their contemporary art is not of much mass interest, only if it can be made fun of in some way or shown to be ridiculous. It's changed a little bit in that the numbers visiting now, I mean, as we can see out here, there are a lot of people. But what is it that they're getting out of this experience? Is it just an excuse to photograph themselves in front of an entrancing environment? Or are they actually learning, appreciating the art itself? And what is it in the press and the media in general to help them to do that? And I think that the media does have, with a developing society as we all have, and if we're talking about communicating with people in a mass sense, one shouldn't talk down to them, one shouldn't think they're idiots, but one should definitely give them serious information about why art is important. And to do this, you need some nuance. Because these artists, a lot of the Hong Kong artists, are extremely intelligent, and they're trying to give their idea of what Hong Kong identity is. Whereas, frankly, I think the newspapers don't care a bit what Hong Kong identity is. They want to make money. And they'll make money in any way they can. And art, culture, just doesn't come into that. And that's the Hong Kong story, ever since the British come here, and it's still the same.
And that flows into my next question about the digital revolution and the internet. I think we all agree that the media industry is facing this huge challenge, and I think, but in terms of art criticism and culture, arts and culture writing, so are we actually facing? Is this the golden? Probably a golden era because of the internet. There's this democratization of publishing, so anybody can write and publish, and then it can be shared and can be circulated. But then it also, of course, raises a lot of question about integrity, and how do you define what's good or bad, and the role of art, and who can be art critics? Do they have to be someone who has be extremely knowledgeable, get a PhD and all that, or it can be a PR person? So what do the panelists think?
I just wanted to maybe follow up a little bit of what David said. It's actually a little bit of a dilemma, because for the first time in Hong Kong's history, we've got a whole lot of an environment and factors that actually say that we should have more intelligent art writing, or writing on politics, or writing on society. And it's very strange that with the digital era, we're dumbing down, when in fact our factors, and I just wrote something after Samwai asked me to make a comment about art criticism for her current issue of City magazine. And I made some comments, and one of her questions was, will art criticism improve in the next 5 years? And I actually gave a very positive spin on that, didn't I? And I said, the factors that make the public, like people like you, well, actually not people like you, people who are not at the art fair, these are people who really want to know more. And the factors are, here are some. People are really interested in learning more about art right now. We have many more art students. 15 years ago, we had 25 arts graduates, fine arts graduates a year. Now we have about 300 a year. And these are artists who are demanding better writing. Also, during the umbrella movement, all of us got engaged with all sorts of issues. We found out things like the Trident police links. All these sort of things that we never talk about in Hong Kong. In those 3 or 4 or 5 months, we all discussed them in the newspapers and amongst ourselves. So actually the environment is really ripe for better arts writing and writing about society. So it's a very, very strange thing that now with everyone with their smartphones, they only want to read sound bites. I don't get it.
Or look at Instagram, or I don't know, Tinny.
What do you think, Tinny? Because at this time, writing will continue. Now we have new technologies and new social media.
三圍佢都有啲關於即係
Yes, I agree with Tinny. We believe in writing. It helps the reader to identify something not so obvious, because when it comes to contemporary art, the art critic will give you an approach, and then it's easier for you to understand the artwork. Young people use Facebook as a work platform. We like to use Snapchat and Instagram. Snapchat is quick and it disappears very quickly. So when I have nothing much to do, I wonder maybe we can use something like Instagram and Snapchat to do art critique. Would things be very different then? Perhaps we'll lose the sense of responsibility or accountability because things will disappear very quickly. While I was listening to Tracy yesterday, and I was really inspired. I was alerted. She said she didn't want misinterpretation of her works, and she will try her best to monitor the situation nearby to make sure no one misinterprets anything that's been created by her. Many art critics romanticize her works or privatize her works. She doesn't like that. So I would ask myself, are we romanticizing some artworks? What about art critics' responsibility and their position?
David.
Yes, it's a very good question. I mean, the artist's intention, of course, is important, and when you're writing about an artist, that you express their intention, using their words very often. But it's not the only thing. Once a work is released out into the public sphere, it becomes an addition of the artist's intention, plus everyone else's reactions to it. And that becomes part of the work. That's a big change. I mean, it used to be that the work was hermetic, and we all read up what the artist's intention was, and that was kind of it. It was sort of stuck in aspect, in history. But now we accept even historical works are like that, and people reinterpret. I mean, people reinterpret early, Song period painting, and in terms of action painting today, I mean, it's being done. It's very important that a writer respects the artist, but also respects the impact of the work and gives his or her view of it, and maybe also public response to the work becomes a subject worth considering. It may not be. But certainly it's very, very important the public response to the public, those individuals themselves, and that they talk about it, and it becomes part of a general discussion about what's going on in Hong Kong and in art. That's a healthy situation.
Okay, so sorry, we were running out of time, and so I would like to invite the audience to take part in the discussion. If you have any questions, 有問題就隨便。
If you have questions, please raise your hands. We can take maybe 1 to 2 questions. We will hand you a microphone. Over there.
Hi, I have a question about breaking into the art critic industry. First of all, 2 questions. I'm a journalist right now, and I was just wondering if that background helps become an art critic. And 2, how do you start, where do you start in terms of getting opportunities to freelance? Thank you.
邊位？
Well, I wouldn't say the art critics have an industry. If it did, it would be very easy.
It's a non-industry, basically.
But to answer your question, first of all, start writing about art. Start educating yourself about art. The thing with art is you must have a knowledge about art history. You must know how some of these art pieces fit into the continuum of art. Because nothing is in isolation. Everything is derivative. Everything has a relationship to something else. So I really think you must like art. And the first thing to avoid, just to follow up on what Tinny said, art criticism is not regurgitating or rewriting a press release. Because press releases are written by galleries or PR companies, and they want a good story. Art criticism should not be a good story. And that is something that Tracy Ehrman is saying. She's saying, basically, I want to control how you see my art. And I totally agree with David. It's not about that. It's about we have a vigorous talking about art and how it fits into everything else.
OK， 喺嗰邊嘅朋友，好遠。
I am pretty much like what John said. Those profile art writers. Thing is, I think Vivienne said something earlier on about why there aren't enough writers joining the art scene. The thing is, people like us. Okay, I'm a radio producer during the day to fund my art writing because it doesn't earn money at all. And the thing is, when you're struggling day-to-day life, and then your article is being sub-edited by people who haven't got a clue about art, and they annihilate your article in the end, it winds you up very much. And like what John said earlier on, I find that I might as well just write for a PR company or agency, write for a PR release, which earns me a lot more money. Fact that people like us, we write about art because we are passionate about art. But the thing is, readers don't seem to really like art. And I find that the political interference in some ways, for example, I remember that back when I was at SMP, a couple of years ago, and my article wasn't even about art, but the subject is someone working at M+. And then I just asked him about a question about political interference in the museum back in 2013. Guess what? At the end of the day, it's edited out in my article. So I can't, you know what? I'm actually quite pessimistic. I can't see anything better until we have a demand of better art writing, if you see what I mean, right? Because right now, okay, you're juggling between the balance of getting paid, making ends meet, and at the same time, if do you see what I mean?
But okay, just one point. I've been writing about art and politics or cultural politics in it's one of the areas where I cover, and just to respond to the one point is that when I write about the possible red tape, political interference in West Kowloon and all that, those stuff didn't get added. Well, they were not edited out. They were still published. So so anyone, any of our panelists want to respond to that, or should we take one more question? Okay, there's this lady in the front.
Thank you very much. I come from Chengdu in Sichuan province. I'm an art critic, and you just mentioned, all of you, that as a freelance writer, it's a very embarrassing situation because there is no financial guarantee. I'm lucky enough to be working as an art critic. I have a column to myself, and so I've always been thinking, when I write art criticism, I always find that some artists will read your articles and he finds or she finds it interesting. Some just doesn't, others just don't care. Sometimes when I write, I seem to be engaging in a soliloquy. It's just something like, as an individual, I respond to this particular exhibition or artwork. So it's not really a standard, a golden standard. So many artists, many members of the audience will have a misinterpretation, thinking you're an authority, an expert, or furnishing a standard. In my personal case, it's just from drawing from my own curatorial or art historical experience, or my sensitivity to art work or particular artists. So it's just an individual piece of opinion. So I feel extremely lonely. I feel like nobody understands you or even bothers to read. So I still want to persist, because I think for me it is quite interesting outlet. For me, if I feel like I'm feeling very satisfied by a good by churning out a good article, so I think I can empathize with the artist. I'm also trying to create a piece of work by means of language, and I think language is probably not exactly in congruence with the intention of the artist. It's just my personal, it's kind of derivative understanding, interpretation, or perhaps even a multidisciplinary cross-disciplinary reinterpretation from the standpoint of sociology or anthropology or even poetry. So this article is also a kind of a creation. I don't know if how David would find my answer. Well, can I actually respond to you faster, because we're kind of running out of time? Or solitude is fantastic, because there's a place for you, there's a column for you that you can use. It's fantastic. A lot of people actually doesn't have a space to publish. I think you're already in a very
I think we're running out of time. It seems that this is a great topic that should be explored further, and writing for Chinese publications and English language publications is a completely different situation. Maybe we should separate the two next time. But thank you very much for coming today. It's a great pleasure to have all of you, and thank you for all the panelists for taking the time to come here and to discuss this topic that was not discussed previously. Hopefully we will have another chance next time. Thank you.